This is the last session. In terms of content, it's also the shortest. I wanted to leave a bit more time at the end so that if there are any questions, everyone gets a chance to ask and hopefully get an answer before you want to head off to the evening's fun and entertainment. It is indeed part 3, and it's really looking forward, because it's something you should think about when deploying your internet. Now, what's the lifespan going to be? Where do we see it going in the future? Are we prepared for that future, or have we even thought about it, or have we just delivered for today? And it's an interesting question, because it wasn't at this particular conference, but 2 years ago, I was actually presenting for one of the analyst firms. It was just over 2 years ago, coming up to 2.5. And I asked the audience, I said, how many people have got a mobile strategy for their intranet? And I should ask, how many people have got a mobile strategy for their intranet? Please put more hands up. Not enough, but it's getting there. It was like tumbleweed blowing in the wind 2 years ago. Whereas now there's the growing acknowledgement, not enough by far people, that we're going to be accessing these intranets from mobile devices. So therefore it should form part of the strategy of the project. What are you designing for? To use it. If people have got devices that they can't use the internet on, they'll use something else. And that's really, it's a trend that's come. We feel like we've had smartphones, and the iPhone's, 5 years old now, but it's really only the last 12 to 18 months where we're starting to see the corporate systems being pushed more into, well, how are these going to work in a mobile environment? So part 3. What's the lifespan of an intranet? Are we thinking about that? What influential trends might disrupt it if they're not already? And then we will just wrap up with a review of all 3 sessions. We'll just go through the key highlights before opening up for final questions before you can, the sun's shining still, you can run outside into the fresh air. Let's dive straight in. Lifespan of an intranet. Does anybody start their intranet project here with a defined lifespan? You're going to run it for 3 years and then shut it down. Anybody? It's not a bad take. The technology is going to start aging, but it's an interesting thing. We tend to drop them in and not think about the exit plan. What will come next? They won't last forever. Even though they are an evolving system that will keep growing, at some point there will be a cutoff where you go to a complete refresh. So it helps to actually think about that. It can help, again, with that original vision and the conflicts that it can create. You can start to say, well, if people go, what if this, what if that? Go, well, in this time frame, this is what we're delivering. It's not everything. It might not be what everyone wants, but it's what we need and it's what we're delivering. And yes, of course, we'll be looking to the future beyond. But it all helps positioning. And it's the dreaded G word that ought to come in at this point. This slide's been in, it's been out, it's been hidden, it's been unhidden. There's a do I dare mention. And I know there are other sessions on governance, and my God, I'm not sure an entire conference couldn't be created on the topic of governance. One of my longest clients from when I set up as I've been independent for just coming up to 7 years, and my very first client, who's still a client today, I still do advice, I just do ad hoc advice when they need it. Their then head of IT retired 3 years ago, and I got invited to the retirement do. And he said the one thing he's never going to miss from his life, and he's a public sector, he's been in IT and in public sector his whole life, and he goes, I'm never going to miss the words governance and compliance. He goes, oh, at last. It was just such a funny moment, because for he's seen a lifetime of massive change in technology and great opportunities, but the G and the C word were the bane of his life, and I think that's the feeling many have. It's not something, however, that I recommend ignoring either. I have to admit, I tend to adopt the approach of just enough governance. Put enough in place where it helps guide the decisions going forward that you need to make. Partly, it locks in that vision, and it keeps people remembering, why did you deploy this internet in the first place? What was the vision for it? Because each time there's a new requirement, you should be thinking, does it align to the vision, yes or no? Yes, probably is a good indicator it's something good to do. If not, it asks a bigger question. Does it mean it shouldn't necessarily be a definite no, because it might be it's time for the vision to change, but there should be a thought process rather than just chunking more and more on top because, well, where else are we going to put it? Let's put it on the intranet. And that's realistically what happens for a lot of intranets. They become messy because they become the dumping ground's a bit of a harsh word, I'm granted, but they become the final stop. If other systems can't do something, let's put it on the intranet. If it's gone beyond the realms of a certain application, pop it on the intranet. SharePoint as a wider platform gets this too in team sites and everywhere else. So having that vision is an opportunity to either say no or stop and rethink, is this the right decision to make? Should we be doing this? The governance should help with the capability. It should articulate what is your capability. What's the internet able to do? Because again, it gives the opportunity to say this is a good idea, that's a terrible idea. And it should scope, because capability isn't just features and technical fun. It should be about the resources, the roles and responsibilities. Somebody may go, hey, we ought to be doing more content classification. Well, our capability doesn't include an dedicated information management team. So unless it's something we can drop in that's easy to use, easy to train, no. Not unless we can justify bringing in a team to take over that capability. So it's a balancing act. It should, therefore, help with change management. It should be about managing the ongoing, and there will be ongoing changes to the internet, trying to pick between the good ones and the bad. And the one thing governance should help with is it should help, again, with that conflict resolution, because there always will be. I've talked to a few quietly on some of the breaks, and I think we'd all agree, in most cases, anybody here work in marketing and communications? I'll be nice. So let's face it, most intranet projects originate out of the marketing department or internal comms if it's separate. Sometimes it's entirely separate, sometimes it's a subdivision within marketing. But the challenge is, back to that slide on the first session about defining your intranet, that's one possible strand. And I think where I see a lot of conflict in projects is where that strand within that marketing are driving is a very valid strand, but they own the intranet. And at the same time, people are asking for the other three strands. They're asking for better search. They're asking for process improvement. They're asking for social networking tools to do other things. But the sponsor and the gatekeeper almost of the internet, it's not part of their remit. And they've been given a remit for this part. And it's not that marketing or comms are bad, obviously, for those of you in the room that are, because it's not. There's limited resources. There's only so much people can do. So rightly, their focus is going to be on the remit for marketing. And I think that's a challenge for intranets. It's back to the question asked earlier about where's the blurring between intranets and team sites. And my answer there, I said it took a bit, is I'll often try and ring fence, if need be, the intranet to keep the content away if it's going in the wrong direction, because it's usually got more limited resources than we acknowledge and is being given far too wide a remit to deliver. So either widen the scope in terms of stakeholders and ownership, or bring it back down and say, well, this bit's the intranet and we have a collaborative workplace alongside. And it can break some of those conflicts that can rise, but they are a real issue. And that's what governance really should be about. And then that final hated word, auditing, but it is important. It's back to that cleanup. It's no use saying you're going to have lifecycle management. You can't automate everything. There's going to be some bits that require somebody to do something before the content dies. And it's no use saying you're going to have it if you don't then check that actually happens. So you can keep governance relatively simple if you just focus on, well, how is it going to help? If you end up with a governance plan sort of that thick and it goes on the shelf, it's not a governance plan, it's just a big report, probably quite academic. It should be about keeping a healthy state to the systems. And if you remember, for everyone that's been right through all three sessions, this idea of the phase of the organisation, the stability, in a period of stability, things are much more settled. When it gets disruptive, things get chaotic, people get stressed. And actually in disruptive periods, things like this have a habit of going out the window. It's partly why I don't sweat too much the details about governance beyond absolute legal implications, because when push comes to shove, if there's an urgent need to just do something, people will forget all rules, all plans. They will just do it if it's right for the business and figure the consequences out afterwards. That's natural. That's how systems operate. So balance is a good thing with governance. The other thing that, if you've got a governance team, and I'm not going to go on about governance all day because it's a frightening topic, but the other nicer side that governance can be helpful for is horizon planning. What is the lifespan of the intranet? It's like look into the future, being able to plan how far you can see. Can we see clearly what's the map of the organisation? It could be the organisation's going through an acquisition that's going to redefine it, that's going to transform it over, and it's got quite a planned 5-year cycle of change, and actually technology should be helping with that, including the intranet. Or it might be you can't see that far forward at all, but how far can you see into the horizon and how do you plan for it? And in terms of making changes and adaptations to an intranet, there's generally 3 options. An evolution, so start adding more onto it, so you're enhancing and adding. There's a sidetrack, which I'll come back to in a minute, but then there's revolution. The evolution and revolution is the 2 extremes. Evolution is you just keep evolving the internet, you keep adding more and more and more until at some point you hit the button and say, no, we're replacing. And it is, it's a complete replacement, it's a revolution, a new change. But in between is the sidetracks, which is quite useful because this is when new trends and new technologies crop up, and it's not really a good fit. Often it's not a good fit for the technology, because if you're using a platform for your intranet, platforms are slow to evolve. The technology trends come through and they drop through in terms of features, but by their nature, they don't move as quickly as niche applications. Sidetracking is an opportunity to say, well, we're going to experiment. We don't know what the value is. And this is exactly how most social efforts have started. People have experimented with the likes of Yammer as a sidetracking project. It's not part of the platform. It's a siloed application. If it has legs and it proves itself, then at some point it will either cause a revolution, if it's truly disruptive, or it will become an evolution. The track will rejoin the main line and it becomes part of the platform. So sidetracking is actually okay. It's quite a good thing when you're experimenting into the unknown, because you can keep it ring-fenced and quite small, let it prove itself, and then push it out to a wider level. So, to keep it a bit lighter for the last session, let's have a look at some of those trends. And no surprises, the 4 big trends. It's all you'll have if you read any tech journals, you'll hear about them. Social media, internet-connected mobile devices with natural user interfaces, big data, which isn't just analytics, but sometimes people don't do a good job of differentiating. And of course, cloud computing, big one, and a big one of interest to intranets. Now, to give my voice a break again, we have a video. This time it's Microsoft. We'll give them a bit of love. And this is a recent interview from their Envisioning Center.
Well, every year for the last few, we've held this Tech Forum event as a time to get some top journalists together with people at Microsoft, share with them some of our research work, and let them understand the way we think the technology and products are going to evolve over the next 5 to 10 years.
There's really 3 themes to Tech Forum this year. The first is the arrival of big data. Think about all the data we're collecting in the world now, and we also have new technology now to visualize that data in new and interesting ways. The second theme is really systems that learn. We've got huge clusters of machines now, and these systems that learn can adapt to you. The third theme is more human natural user interfaces.
Well, there's a number of things driving the trend toward big data. First is we just have a lot more ways to collect data. People have computers on their person, in their cars, in their homes, in their offices. The computers themselves are becoming more laden with sensors. And it's become very inexpensive to put cameras and microphones and other types of sensors into the environment or into the workplace. And so we have these big streams of data that are being collected. The cost of storage has also declined dramatically, and our ability to aggregate it, particularly in these cloud services, means that it's now economical to be able to retain all this data. It's the golden moment now where big data is going to really create some interesting results. The systems that we've had for many years have been getting increasingly powerful, and people have dreamed about being able to make the computer learn things, sort of the way people learn things. But today we're getting to that point that we really can use the same kind of processes and algorithms that allow people to learn to allow the machine to learn. And so with that, we're starting to see a revolution in the range of applications that we can apply what we call machine learning to. But they're starting to happen now. Fortunately, through machine learning and other techniques, we're starting to give the computer the same kind of senses that humans have.
We can talk to them, we can touch them, we can gesture at them, and we can do all of these at the same time.
And with that, we can start to create a more natural interaction between people and machines. Well, I think today we live in a world where computing has already changed our global society. Many people will attribute to Microsoft and the evolution of the PC the ability to have changed people's lives.
Well, really, we're moving from a world of information technology to intelligent technology. When you think about the arrival of big data, new, more human natural interfaces and systems that learn, and you combine all of those things together, we really have enough technology now to change how you live, how you work, and how you play. And that's what's exciting about Tech Forum.
So there's no surprises there. And Microsoft, like all other technology vendors, they're targeting very similar trends. I can't help but point out. You may have noticed no iPads were harmed or even used in the making of that video. Obviously, it's a Microsoft perspective, and that's understandable. But it's quite consistent across what we're seeing. From an intranet perspective, possibly one of the big disruptions is around natural user interfaces. And I've talked about this already in the design session before. We are now touching our devices a lot more than we used to, in a wholly positive way. But it changes how we interact with information. And we're pinching it. Please don't anyone else smile, because I'm going to crack and start laughing. But it changes how the information needs to be designed and worked for this to be realistic. And if you look at your phone interfaces, it's interesting to see the websites that have been very quick to make sure they are as functional now on a phone and a tablet as they are at a computer, compared to the sites that aren't. I get wholly frustrated now if I view a website on a phone or a tablet, and I'm an iPad fan, that hasn't been designed to cope with it. You know, you're having to zoom out, and then you touch one of the damn adverts, and it goes somewhere else. You know, and it's frustrating. It's a frustrating user experience. The same will be true of intranets if we don't think about how we design them for user interfaces. And it's not just touch. We're starting to talk to our devices now. We don't like talking to people anymore, but we do like talking to our devices. Yes, this is Siri. This is from Apple. And it really does work. It was the first thing I tried when I got my phone. If you need to hide a dead body, Apple will definitely help you with that. But it's interesting, and if you look at the adverts for Siri, and it's talk is arguably at a much more immature stage at the moment, but it shows a direction where we start to give instructions to technology. You know, when you're driving, talking to your phone is inherently more safer. Maybe still not advisable, but it's a lot safer than tapping away at a screen and not looking where you're going. And will we see this come into the workplace? Well, it would depend on the workplace. If you remember from part one, if you're in the Aston camp or if you're in cubicle hell, as to whether you even feasibly can talk. But it does change the process. This I find particularly interesting. When Siri first launched, it was other vendors, including Microsoft, were quite dismissive, going, well, we've had speech-enabled devices for ages. But what started to change is following the process through. And freaky geek that I can be at times, I now pretty much, if I remember something just as I'm going to bed, I do not want to get a laptop out and type it, but I do just trigger off Siri and dictate it into Siri, set a reminder for 9 tomorrow, I've got to email so-and-so that I've just realised I should have emailed 3 hours ago. That for me is fabulous, quite frankly. It's a real boon compared to having to, even with predictive text, it would have taken much longer. But anyone planning on talking to their intranets in the near future? Yeah, well, we're trying it again in 2 years' time, and we're hoping to get 3 hands in 2 years' time. But it's something that's coming down the line with the trends. And then obviously, taking it to the next level, we're starting to see motion. And this is the Kinect device from Microsoft, which was very quickly hacked by, I think it was a university-type hospital in America, so that surgeons could swipe through without touching anything, because once they're sterile, in a sterile environment, that is really, really important. Whereas before, they'd be elbowing and trying to cope with sheets. Now, they could go through and then can use the gestures to zoom right in. Fascinating, useful use of Kinect, as opposed to the when you're up and down doing some crazy game. So these are all going to disrupt how we interact with information. And what is an intranet? It's for helping us interact with information. So it is logical that over time, this will start to come into the workplace and into intranets. But there is also a reality check. We're not great at predicting the far-out future. This is an image from the 1950s when, we were all going to be driving hovercraft cars or flying cars around, and the world was going to be so different. We're actually quite rubbish at predicting far out into the future. And we tend to overestimate what we're going to achieve far out into the future and underestimate what will happen in the next 2 years. The mobile phone shift and how we're using information being one classic example. But there are realities too. If you look at and I was originally going to use Microsoft's Vision for the Future video, but it drives me bonkers, quite frankly, because it's too far out. I'm sorry, but my kitchen is nothing like what they're envisioning a kitchen may become, with every screen and surface and tapping and showing it a carrot and it telling you it's a carrot and how to cook a carrot. And there's realities there. And if you look at the future workplace type videos, they tend to focus on the younger generations coming through, who tend to be more tech savvy. The harsh reality is we're an ageing workforce, particularly in on this continent, in Europe, I mean, on most of the globe. So there is we don't tend to take that perspective. We just tend to look at everything as hip, trendy, cool, it's going to be future, it's going to be wonderful. But actually, the kind of devices are going to be more around how does an ageing workforce interact with information. And actually, that's where I think the touch and the speech is really interesting. This was a lesson that was taught to me literally in my second job. So this is back in the mid-90s. And I was a network manager. It was a brand new role. They hadn't had a network before, so we installed a network, Novell. And then we had a network manager, which was the rather bored. They did know, at the time I was a trainee accountant, and it wasn't going very well. I got really bored. And they hadn't noticed, because it was early days of spreadsheets, and at the time you were supposed to print out the spreadsheet as a template, fill it in by hand, and then type it into the system. That was a crock of rubbish. So I tinkered with my dad's computers, so VIC-20 for those that are in the same age, going with Commodore. So I automated my job, basically. I thought, well, blow that. I can do a macro in the spreadsheet, not have to print it out, not have to write it by hand, press one button, and then it went and did all the other spreadsheets for me. And I then started a solitaire tournament in the company, because I then got most others done. We were a bunch of young people all together, and we were literally playing solitaire all day when the bosses thought we were handwriting all these notes out. But that's the thing. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. But that's the thing, as it moves forward, at the time, they realised that was quite useful, so I got my network manager job. And this was the bigger lesson, because I was having a while of a time playing with those sorts of games, is I started to deploy laptops. Laptops were very new and very big and heavy back then, and we had network cards. We actually had CompuServe accounts. This is pre-internet being everyone, so the really important people in the business got CompuServe accounts so they could message each other, and then the techies went onto the Kix forums. But we had a lot of PhDs. It was an engineering company, and actually some of the PhDs were quite elderly, and one came to me one day with the laptop I'd given him and the network card with the dongle that came out the side for you to put the cable in, and he said, I can't cope with this card. And I went, what's wrong with it? Does it not work? He goes, well, I'm sure it does. He goes, but I've got arthritis in my fingers, and the connectors are metal and they keep snapping. Can you get me a rubberized one so that I can get it? It was a real reality check for me, because I'd never thought about that. I'd just gone and researched, and they look good, they do the job, bought them, and off we went. And it's something to consider, age of the workforce. What are the right tools for the workforce? So we tend to envisage a wacky future, but in fact, our demographic reality in 10, 20 years' time is probably very different to the Office of the Future visions. And the reality is, there are technology trends, but it's how the industries get disrupted that results in the change. This is an interesting, it's a good quote from Telefonica. Digital technologies do not recognise geographical boundaries or respect companies or hierarchies that have been successful in the past. That neatly sums up an awful lot of industry's problems right now, because they're founded on principles that the internet and digital technologies just so whatever. Sorry, microphone. And that's the disruption. It's disrupting because it's the process that shifts. And to give an example of a process being shifted, and it's quite a painful one in some respects, obviously, I could have used the horrible pictures, but I prefer to use one where the towers still stood. There were a lot of lessons learned out of September the 11th, but this is the one I'm going to look at. The CIA afterwards, it became evident, well, not quickly, but quickly enough, they had all the information about the attack, but it was in different places, in silos, that not only were not connected, they legally were not allowed to be connected. They were rigidly enforced and separated, because that's how it worked. And that's the sort of thing that ended up happening as a result. Everything prior to that event was on a need-to-know basis for information. So, time for a slide build. We've got a man in a hat. That means he's a spy, obviously. Any hat? Well, good. They left. He's got some information, shares it up to the boss, who he might think his peer needs to see this information, but legally he is not allowed to share that information to him. It goes up the chain sends it to the analyst, and they have a look and think, yeah, that's a bit worrying, actually. In the meantime, another man in a hat has some information, shares it with his boss, up it goes, huge time delay. If those two pieces of information have been put together, they'd have had a very different outcome, potentially, but the time delay has prevented it from happening. And on top of that, the people that really would have known what to do were not allowed to see each other's information. Massive paper, the link, if you actually search for CIA wiki and blog in 3 terms in Google, you should get straight to the paper behind all of this. They moved to this idea that you've got to be much more transparent. The world has changed, and therefore their systems have to change with it, and therefore the technology is investigated to see if it can help change the systems. So it's not a technology driving this change, it's a process shift. So now we've got our two spies. They share all the information, put it up in a great big bucket. The analysts have a look, they put 2 and 2 together and go, ah, bomb. They notify the right people, it comes back down, and the information's shared. And this is the key quote that drove their change. The intelligence decision implementation cycle can now be as short as 15 minutes. And if it can be that short for the other people, it needs to be that short for us. So it was a process that drove the change, not a technology trend. Technology enabled it in some ways, but until that process changed, nothing would have improved. That's just one example, that there's also a fifth trend that's particularly relevant to intranets. It's the other G word, gamification. I had reservations about including this one in trends too. Anyone here not familiar with gamification at all? Apart from the fact is, you lying or just genuinely you've never... You see, it's a stupid word for starters. I mean, it was much better when they just said game dynamics. Somebody had to invent a single buzzword, so we get gamification. But it's simply game dynamics at work. So the dynamics that work within games and within play, how can they be leveraged in a work environment to lead to a better outcome than you otherwise would have had? There's various flavours of gamification and various uses, but the two sort of bigger ones are the simplest level badges, badge systems. If you go on any social network today, you'll be encouraged, profile 67% complete, or somebody will have got the sheriff's badge for checking in to Starbucks somewhere umpteen times and tweeting it automatically. There's this whole badge culture. That's only one thread of gamification now. Badges are proving very effective at getting people to do tasks they otherwise wouldn't bother to do. So do not consider a badge system if morale's your problem. It's not about motivation and morale. It's about getting boring tasks completed that are useful to somebody else, but you're the sucker that's got to do it for whatever reason. And if you think about it, look on the social networks. They need you updating stuff so they can mine it and then do the recommendation engines. So those badges help with everything. One of the biggest, I always argued when Facebook acquired Instagram, it was the fact they were getting the location data, I think, is of more value to them than the photos, because every photo shared carries a lot of metadata with it that didn't require any effort on the user's point. They just snapped the picture, time, location, date stamped, account logged in that sent it. That's a lot of automatic classification, and it's very accurate because there's no human involved in doing that. They just took the picture. So it's got its benefits, but it is about mundane tasks. The other aspect of gamification, and it's one that I think is potentially coming into the workplace, and it's where intranets can be useful and help, is immersive learning. And if you think about it, we've had aspects of it for decades. Flight simulators, effectively, is a game, a very serious game, but it's a very effective way of training pilots without trashing a rather expensive vehicle and killing people whilst they're learning. The simulator is a safe environment. You can simulate formulas within, outcomes from formulas within Excel. Effectively, that's a form of game, very simple. And people don't tend to talk about gamification this way, but that's the sort of thing that is about immersive. You're playing around in a safe environment. And then there's the third angle, and that is things like massive multiplayer online games. And this is a little bit of a fun one that I find as a way of explaining where gamification could have lots of potential uses in the company if people would allow it to happen. If you play something like World of Warcraft, does anyone here play World of Warcraft? I don't actually, but does anybody else? It's okay. It's a very popular game. So for everybody else that doesn't understand it, you run a guild, basically. It's about quests and good guys, bad guys, and you build a team and you go on a quest, you have a journey, you get an outcome. It's classic games, it's immersive, we get very addicted to these sorts of structures. What's interesting is it's completely self-organising. So, you might decide, I'm going to have a guild, I need to get popular with some good people, I need a magician, a dog, a spy, I think I got my man in the hat turned up as well. And then you find a quest. So we go and have a look and see what's going on, find a quest, a target, something to achieve, and determine what skills we need to meet that target, to win the quest. So we need a bit of brawn, we need a bit of magic, and and Mary Poppins. I was running out of icons on the selection choice for this one. But the team is selected and they embark upon a journey. This is classic gaming. Along the way, they will meet many trials and tribulations in a bit of fire and brimstone. They may realise they've got the wrong skill set, so quick Skype chat and along comes the dog to help. They find the evil villain, a battle ensues, there's lots of shields and stuff. Bad guy gives up, they win the trophy, get the money, they share the lessons learned, they go back into the guild. World of Warcraft in a slide, basically. But there's a lot to like about this because it's a very democratic process. There's no one winner in the guild here. It's shared. Everything's shared. The credits are shared, the lessons are learned because they operate as a team. I use this a lot, it has to be said more in collaborative sessions normally than intranets, but the lessons apply to all. Everyone here seen that program, The Weakest Link? It was popular a few years ago. I confess I occasionally saw it too. So anyway, one day when, for whatever reason, it was on, it was the funny, I blogged it, it's the only reason I can still remember this story. There was some poor student who'd signed up for the Anne treatment that, she used to be really nasty to them and intimidate them. And it was like, well, what are you going to do when you grow up then in an ultra-patronising way? And this is a student at university. He goes, I'm going to be an office manager. This does not give out good messages of the state of education in this country. You don't go to university to become an office manager. But he sat there straight-faced, and that was it, office manager. He clearly didn't appear to be that ambitious in life. However, for all we know, he's the king of a guild on World of Warcraft. He's able to coordinate a team, pick a target, motivate them, get them to log in, turn up, do it, and share it all back. He is as productive and collaborative as you could imagine in this environment. Yet he might hate his job at work and do the absolute bare minimum and be down as somebody with no ambition, no skills, just, rank and file, doing a job. So what a missed opportunity, because this skill set would be valuable to a company. But we don't think of it in that context. I think this is where gamification, it's the very early days, but for systems involving people, and intranets are all about helping people, thinking about games and enjoying work leads to better outcomes than forcing people to do the stuff they don't want to do. It doesn't, of course, mean there's always jobs in life and roles and things we have to do we don't enjoy. But injecting a bit of fun, if you want a good outcome, if you want to be more productive, if you want to share expertise, build knowledge, innovate, generate ideas, get people to have fun doing it and you'll get better outcomes. So it's something to consider. It's not just about badges. Badges are great for simple tasks. Think more about immersive. How can we get people enjoying what they do? Because it's really quite important, these 5 connected trends, if we look at everything we've focused on around productivity and information sharing, over the past 10 to 15 years has tended towards the left. Productivity gains through efficiency. Standardise the routine. You get much richer information if you take a narrow slice and do it very, very well. You control the decision process. There's a hierarchy. It's that good old need-to-know basis. That's great when you need predictable results because you'll get them. What's happening today is they might not be the results you want anymore, but they will be predictable. You'll get exactly what you program into this system. It just might not be what you need anymore. Over on the right, this is realistically where we're seeing more and more of business go, personalised. I was going to throw up an A/B testing example on the same basis. Everything's going much more real time. And to make good decisions now, it's about being much more transparent about data. And you think people that are working through social networks, they're more informed about a company's products than half the company's employees these days, if they've got a vested interest in that product. They self-organise. We are shockingly good at self-organising when we're allowed to be, when we're given a stake in the outcome. And it's when we don't have a stake in the outcome where we tend to just do the bare minimum. And we're starting to see these sensory adjustments. And this ties back into the early trends around touch, sense, motion. There's a lot of sensors going into all our devices, which from an intranet and content perspective enables actually a lot more auto-classification than was previously possible, and it's a lot more accurate classification. So trends, they are all around us. They are disrupting processes. I would argue they're completely redefining some aspects of productivity. This, in certain scenarios, is still absolutely on the ball today, but it's not the standard for all scenarios. And it's really important when you're looking at your processes how they're being disrupted. Okay, home straight. It's getting hot again. Just to review what we've done through these last 3 hours nearly. To create a successful intranet, it really helps, to have a shared vision. And by a shared vision, it means that one that everyone's bought into. that they're seeing that this is good for both the company and for themselves, that everyone is going to benefit. It's not easy. None of these steps are easy. And I think the trouble is we tend to rush them because we can't get a grasp on them. There's nothing good going to happen to your project when you try and just avoid doing the difficult stuff. You're delaying it down the line. It will come back and bite you. So, shared vision, but above all, make it feasible. You know, if you've got an office environment that's very open plan, very of a certain style, then your intranet should align to that. Again, if you're a design, I would expect a design-oriented company to have a very different approach to their intranet than to a process-centric, rightly or wrongly, but it should align to the culture. It's so important. Otherwise, you just misalign expectations. People think one thing and then they get something very different. So always be thinking, is it feasible? And it's back to that sufficient resources. You know, are you resourcing the project well enough? And I feel for many an intranet manager, because they are usually trying to deal with people placing a lot of expectation on them and not giving them anywhere near enough resource to deliver on that expectation. It's wholly unfair. It's very, very common. So anyone in the audience that's an intranet manager, I sympathise. It's not easy. Always, always keep it as simple as you can. The design, you know, if you're going for page layouts, don't go and have a dozen different page layouts for every possible scenario. Keep them simple. Keep the structure so as people navigate around, they see familiar things. It behaves as they expect it to, and it behaves as other tools, similar tools on the internet behave. And we mentioned earlier, it's going increasingly responsive. Always be thinking from a design perspective, are you making it more accessible and usable than it otherwise would have been? You know, it's really important. Obviously, there's visual design around that you can include, but don't detract from that core outcome, which is to make it more usable than it otherwise would have been. Deliver in phases, chunk the project down, and sometimes ring-fence elements. So particularly when it comes to the vision, if you know you're having requirements that are going to be very difficult to deliver, park them, separate them, make sure that you can deliver. So break the project right down into phases. And in those phases, if you remember the little feedback loop system, understand the dependencies. You know, what's going to stop things happening, or what can you not predict? You know, those uncertain outcomes that can very quickly change the cost of the project. And then manage the life cycle. So content, it gets born, it gets used, and then there's the cleanup afterwards. You know, that certainly within formal content, its value will degrade over time. And don't forget, you know, what happens when people leave? Have you planned that into your life cycle management process? But above all, less is more. You know, kill content, save a tree. I might put it on a T-shirt. I can't emphasise enough. Most intranets, you could just kill out a lot of content. Life would be happy. And it's all about that signal-to-noise ratio, trying to get the right signals to come through and not be drowned out by the noise. But most important of all, really, for intranets in particular, is to be adaptable. You know, understand that rhythm of the organisation's cycle. When the organisation is going through change, tools such as the intranet should be in sync with that phase. Is it a disruptive phase? Is it a stable phase? It should very much fit into the rhythm. Because circumstances, they always change. There's an absolute inevitability. Those of you who are in the first session, it was the first session with the sound talk from Ted, from TED, you know, he talked about how we like the sound of surf because it's about the same pace as the heartbeat at sleep. And there's just some kind of resonance there. You know, everything has a cycle. Are you in the quick bit? Are you in the slow bit? Make that project align. So, to wrap up, why have an intranet? Hopefully, nobody would think this is a good outcome. This is not what you should be aspiring for. To not look like SharePoint is not the goal of any intranet project, or shouldn't be. It should be about helping the business, because that's really all an intranet is. It's web-based tools to support the organisation. The intranet is a supporting role in business. You know, enterprise applications own entire business processes. The intranet is the glue that often binds many different systems and different people. So always be thinking, what are we trying to achieve? What are the benefits? And if I leave you with one thing, take the garden approach rather than the building approach. Think like a garden. You can plan anything into a garden. You can make it as rich and varied and as expensive as you want, or you could have a simple piece of lawn and a path. You could have your botanical garden, your greenhouses, your water features, but it's all variable. It's about thinking, well, what's the vision, scoping a rough idea of what we want it to look like to make sure it's feasible and build it. But even so, maintaining it over time, you may reach a point and say, you know what, we hate that path now. It was great at the time, but it's not a path we want anymore. It's okay. Change the garden, change the intranet. It's just a tool. With that, 3 sessions done. Thank you so much for listening. I hope these sessions have been useful this